All right. Thank you all for coming. This week's session, or today's session, is Parent to Parent, Real Talk from Real Thrivers, and it's our third session, which is Looking Inward. This is a parent panel that we've had going on. We had two previous sections the two past Fridays, and this is the third one, and there's another one next Friday. So just so everybody knows, the National American Indian and Alaska Native Childhood Trauma Treatment Service and Adaptation Center is supported by a grant from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA. And the content of this event is the creation of the presenters, and the opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect the views or policies of SAMHSA, HHS, or the American Indian and Alaska Native NCTSN. I would like everybody to take a moment to read our land acknowledgement. It was written by three of our staff members, Ella Driscoll, Keely Driscoll, and Sean Bear. So I'm going to give everyone a minute. Thank you. With that, I'm going to go into this one. So following today's event, we're going to send out the links to the presentation slides as well as a recording, which we can send in the chat right now. These are our previous two sessions, and you can view those later after this session if you didn't attend the first two, or if you just want to revisit them. Any links will be shared in the chat box, and there will be a link to our evaluation gift brush survey at the end of the session, which will be sent out. You can watch out for the message from Eleanor or myself. So I'm going to hand it over to Teresa.
Good morning and good afternoon, everybody.
Sorry.
That's okay, Liz. My name is Teresa Brewington from the Native Center for Behavioral Health. I'm the co-director of the National American Indian and Alaska Native TTC K-12 school program and the co-director of the National American Indian and Alaska Native Child Traumatic Stress Initiative Category 2. Welcome to today's event. Today's event is going to be, I think, the best of the series that we're having from our panelists. I'm definitely looking forward to it. I do want to say, and I know that Liz is going to touch on this in just a minute, that the day may be very emotional for some here and may trigger emotions for you, but we promise to leave you guys on a good way. But I know for one, everything that's going to be said here today is very relatable to my past experiences as well. So just sit back, listen, and I hope that we leave here with lots of learning and in a good way. And I'm going to pass it down to Liz.
Well, you guys already saw my slide for just a second. My name is Liz Sadoff. I am the program coordinator for the National American Indian and Alaska Native Childhood Trauma TSA. I recently graduated from the College of Public Health and Community Behavioral Health, and I have a certified health education specialist certification. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to our amazing DRA, Eleanor.
Hello, everyone. My name is Eleanor Witt. I'm currently in my second year of pursuing a master's degree in school counseling from the University of Iowa. I'm the graduate research assistant on the trauma grant with Liz and Teresa, and I'm very excited to have you all here today. If you haven't heard from our presenters yet, I think you are really in for a treat. And even if you have, you're still in for a treat. They are awesome. And so just listen and enjoy. And I'm going to pass it to Melanie.
Good afternoon. Aho Nadeshi Kiskachi. It's good to see everyone again. Today's Friday, and I'm going to attempt to share my screen, and hopefully we can not have any technical difficulties. So let me do that now.
Oh, Melanie, we're going to have everybody introduce themselves first.
Oh, I was also ready to get into it.
You were perfect. You were ready to go.
Okay.
All good.
So you've probably read my my bio, but I'm just happy to be here and share in the parent to parent, and just want you all to know that these presentations are very helpful, not just to our participants, but to us as panelists too. It's a very healing journey for us. So I will pass it off to the next person. Thank you.
Oh, Madawe. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ronald Wakini. I am half Comanche, half not. I am the current Associate Director of the Oklahoma Association of Problem Gambling and Gaming, and I'm just happy to be here for our third session and looking forward to sharing some of my story with you. So with that, I will pass it to Cynthia.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cynthia. I am an enrolled member of the Kickapoo Tribe of Kansas. I am also Muskogee Creek. I am currently an advocate for trafficking. I also am a provisional licensed drug and alcohol counselor. And I'm just happy to be here with you guys. I'm happy to share my story with you guys and take care of yourself as you go through this presentation with us. And with that, I will pass it over.
Raquel Ramos. Hi, I'm Raquel Ramos, and I am a prevention specialist for the National Indian Education Association, as well as working on the Whole Child Initiative. I'm just happy that everybody's here to hear our stories. And like Cynthia said, take time today to listen as well as take care of yourself. And we're just happy that you're here. Thank you. I'm going to pass it to Lestina.
My Dakota name is Shining Light Wind Woman, and I'm named after the sun that rises in the morning and the breeze that comes with it. It's a very old name, and I'm very proud to honor and represent my Dakota ancestors here today. My English name is Lestina Saul Merdassi, and I'm a first-year grad student working on my clinical mental health license at Bellevue University out of Omaha, Nebraska, and I'm very honored to be here. Thank you. Ronaldo.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ronaldo Tomorito. I was born into the Mud Clan, which is Hashkoshni of Dene people, and then the Noshesha Dene clan, which is the Bear clan. I was raised on the reservation and pursued to help children with disabilities down the road after I had my children, and I have been pursuing this field for quite a while and love speaking on behalf of our Native children with disabilities. And I'm just really glad to be here. Thank you, everyone.
With that, I get to talk about our amazing session. The parent-to-parent panel came together originally as breaking the cycle. So breaking the cycle of parenting, the cycle of abuse, the cycle of what continues to go on and how we can break it. It started as talking as survivors and it turned into thrivers, which was a wonderful transition. And so the overall goal of this series is to acknowledge the past, present, future, and strengths of Native parents as we come together to encourage all Native parents to do the same, to heal collectively and break the cycle. So what I just put in the chat is our previous two sessions, which were deconstructing the years that made us and the cycle of parenting. This one is looking inward, so it's the personal stories of our panelists. They're amazing personal stories, to be honest. And then our next session is breaking the cycle, which is talking about strategies when breaking the cycle. As Teresa mentioned earlier, this presentation and discussion may evoke strong feelings relating to one's past traumas. Please feel free to speak with the group after the session. You can stay on and we can discuss. This is a safe place, so feel free to express yourself in a respectful way in the chat or on muting. If you have any questions, we will be saving them for the end of this session, just so we can manage time. And with that, I am going to hand it over to Melanie.
So again, we're going to look at inward into the parenting journey. And last week, I shared my family tree and I gained a better understanding of the shift in my mindset in taking a deeper dive into how my parents and grandparents are raised and how their parenting styles influenced my life and influenced the way that I parent. And then, I shared my healing trees, what I like to call it. This is the beginning of what I like to call my healing tree, but in order to know where I'm going to share where I started. So my humble beginnings began in Kannapolis, Kansas. It's in central Kansas. I learned that my paternal grandmother agreed to take in my older brother and I, and he was a year older than me, but we shared the same father and mother, but it was our grandmother who took on the role as mother through our childhood up until I was about 12 years old. So we lived in a small, tiny home on a piece of land that my grandmother and grandfather purchased. It was an acre on the opposite side of the railroad tracks. We had no indoor plumbing. We all slept in the same room. My grandmother and I slept in a twin roll-out bed, and my brother and dad slept on the floor. So our yard was our playground for throwing dirt clods and mud football or jumping off the roof of the tiny house. That's the house that I would jump off of and just thought it was the best thing in the world. So this is my grandmother when she was younger. I saw my grandmother as a hard worker. She was a provider, a disciplinarian. She taught me how to wash on a scrub board. She taught me how to plant potatoes. I watched her make tortillas and carry on with her social network by taking my brother and I to church. However, my brother and I, we weren't always well-behaved children. One day I was looking down the road and saw a man who looked like my dad walking down the road near our house that I grew up in, that I just shared. And I was excited and I yelled out and ran to my grandma and my brother, hey, Dad's coming. And sure enough, it was him. We were reunited. I don't know what the timeline that had been since we were separated, but I knew that it had been a while since we'd seen either one of our parents. So fast forward that to age 12. I lost my grandmother. She passed away when she was 78. And as a 12-year-old, I felt really sad and mad at the same time that she left me. I felt, abandoned. I didn't really understand why my grandmother didn't let me speak to my mother when she would call, or why we didn't see my mother for long periods of time. I didn't understand why I couldn't go in my grandma's house with my dad and my aunt. Were going through my grandmother's things to prepare for the funeral. So I was told to stay out in the car, sort of out of the way. And I just cried by myself. I thought it was, it wasn't until we put my away that I really noticed that my dad's grieving, because he had always been this tough, macho guy. That was the first time that he really hugged me, in that way and comforted me. I was 12 years old but I don't recall if anyone else comforted me during that time. I just remember that my older brothers came to the funeral and we were reunited for a short time, and they left just as soon as they arrived. They were on their own paths. So my dad eventually remarried, and we gained 2 stepsisters that you see in the picture, and a stepmother. And that same year, my grandmother passed. My little brother Robert was born. That's the baby in her arms. And I was happy that at least my grandmother was able to hold him in her arms before she passed away. And it was at that time that I bonded with my little brother. We were like 10 years apart. But I doted on him like he was just a toy baby. And I took him for walks in his stroller and held him and loved on him and just looked after him in a way that I never thought I would. I sort of felt protective of him. And in my heart, I kind of knew that one day I'd be taking care of him. I don't know why, but I just did. So as time wore on, I longed to be closer to my mom. I had spent a summer with my aunties on my dad's side and cousins in Ohio, and they took care of me all through that summer, but I wanted to know my mother. I wanted to know who she was. So I had made a decision that when I returned to Kansas, I would ask her if I could live with her, and it just felt like it was time. And I was 14 at that time. So once I arrived to visit, I begged my mom to stay with her, and she agreed. But at that time, I didn't realize how unstable she was. But once I enrolled in school and moved from my aunt's house, I thought she had a stable job. I was going to school. She was working, and then she decided that we were going to visit her parents in Oklahoma. So we supposedly went there for Christmas, only to learn that we were staying. And I was very upset, scared, nervous. We were basically homeless, living with relatives off and on, and I would become angry with my mom. I saw how different life was going to be in Oklahoma. I really felt out of place. I felt, not so much by her, but I just felt unloved, unwelcomed, disliked, really pushed away by my mom's family. I sort of became the in-house babysitter for the weekend so that relatives could party. I really felt trapped. But by that time I had turned 15 and I had a steady boyfriend whom I began staying with on a regular basis. So my mom would come home on the weekends and, she was there during the week, but she would stay gone during the weekends, and it just kind of left me babysitting the younger cousins or having me be around in the house as partying was going on. So I really felt unsafe, despite the backlash that I would get from my mom when I would stay at my boyfriend's house. She would come looking for me. And it was an ongoing cycle of partying, being homeless, waiting on that check to come in to the mail. Missed a lot of school by either skipping or having to drive my mom to the emergency room to get her medications. So this is when I really realized that she had a substance use problem. My family, mostly the women of the family, they would tell me negative things about my mother all during this time, but they never really, from what I could see, offered me any explanations as to what part did they play in any of this, what the behavior and the mental health issues were about. I just didn't know. I just began to see that if I stayed in this environment, that I was not going to graduate from high school. So I eventually called my dad and asked if I could come back home. I explained to him that if I don't come home now, I'm not going to graduate. So he took me back. We had not spoken for about 3 years because he was upset that I left. And I basically, ran away and didn't talk to him because I was afraid he was not going to let me go, stay with my mom, even though he sort of knew what I was walking into. I finally graduated from high school. That was my big goal. Moved back in with my boyfriend, and after a few years of living together, we split up off and on again. We finally reconnected, and eventually we got married. So this is where I begin to live out some of my parents' mistakes that I had seen. I married and I had my first daughter at the age of 25, and I waited because I had, so many cousins that I was watching and brothers and sisters. So the first few years were good, but things really started to unravel. I experienced a miscarriage, but eventually, had my second daughter 10 years later at the age of 35. But by this time, I could sense that my depression was still there. I was unhappy with my marriage. I experienced substance abuse, and I was beginning to pull away from the marriage because I just couldn't see living in this unhappiness. I had my daughters, my beautiful daughters, but I felt that I needed to show them a different life, one where alcohol was not the norm, and that's all they had seen. My oldest one had, that's all she'd really seen her whole life was, weekends of small gatherings, just events, football events, just those type of events, and any family function where we would have alcohol involved. So during that time, my younger brother Robert came back into the picture. By this time he was, in his 20s. He came to live with us. He was also down on his luck and was abusing substances all through his youth and into his adulthood. And this is when I realized this was the time that I was going to help him. So I took him in. I always knew that I would, try to help him and help him find a job, get established. And he did all those things, which made me very proud, proud sister. And I supported him even though I was going through my own problems. I eventually moved out of the house, got my own apartment. My brother moved in with me so that we could help each other with bills. The girls stayed with their dad because at that time I was afraid. My confidence was so low, even though I was able to do that I didn't want to fight with just didn't want to fight about the divorce and the girls. So I didn't want my daughters to see that behavior. I didn't want them to follow in my footsteps. And, I would have these flashes of seeing my parents argue and feeling scared. And so I didn't want that for my girls. But I didn't want that memory to haunt them. So I let the girls stay with their dad until, I was that, so I could see how strong I was, and not be afraid to reclaim them. So at this point, my daughter, they were 4 and 15, and my youngest daughter would go back and forth, and that went on for a while, and she changed school, made new friends, basically started over. My youngest continued to go back and forth. We had a good life, making the same decisions that I made during their teen years. So I was just beginning to get into the stages of my work in prevention, and I lost my brother in 2014 to suicide. And so that very fear that I had for my daughters became a reality for me with my brother. I felt like I had lost a child. I was a mother figure to him, and it felt like I had let him down. And I've never felt so much pain, so much regret, so much sorrow and grief. But it was a traumatic event for my entire family, and we suffered greatly. And eventually I wanted better for my girls. I had PTSD. I struggled with my own thoughts. I struggled with understanding how this could have happened. I thought that I saved him. But it only made me doubt if I could be strong enough to be a mother to my own daughters. I finally had a breakdown at work, and one of my coworkers came by my side and invited me to Native American church. I had never attended. I didn't know what it was about. I'd gone to Sweat Lodge, but never really did the Native American church. And it was through that experience that I felt, healing. I felt connected. I felt safe. I felt secure. And I wanted that for my daughters, so I brought them in so it could, heal their wounds. And we stayed together through this time, and we supported one another, and we're still healing together through the loss of my brother. I became more aware of my daughter's mental health, and we all began to talk more about how we were feeling, and my oldest daughter and I worked together, so we both spent a lot of time together. We took classes on suicide prevention, and my oldest daughter oversaw a grant on suicide, and she finished college. And all through this painful experience, I've watched her become a woman who's living her life in the best way she can despite the traumas she's experienced. She's resilient. And my youngest daughter, she's almost 18, and she'll graduate this year. We've all grown up together through grief, sadness, and painful memories, but we all grew to be stronger together, and we look out for each other, and we support one another. And we still have rough days, but as I tell both my daughters, I want you both to be strong enough to take care of yourselves. I won't always be around to solve your problems, so you must learn all the ways to be self-sufficient. Learn ways to self-soothe yourself, surround yourself with positive people, and just work hard for the things that you want in life. If I've taught you anything, it was to love yourself first. My love is unconditional, but they must love themselves first to keep going. And my hope is that I broke the generational cycle, or at least slowed it down so we can heal as a family. And the one thing that I want to leave with today, is that, you are the medicine. Parenting isn't easy. I've learned that. I've learned that you and me, we are the medicine to healing. And every time that I have to, talk about these things, it isn't easy. Sometimes I think that it's gotten a little bit better. But, through all of this, I just want to say that I don't have all the answers. We're not completely healed, but we do keep trying, and we still keep going. And next week, I hope to share some of those ways that we have been able to, reconnect with our feelings, and sharing out some of the work that we do in prevention, and just sharing how far we've come. And thank you for listening to my story and my journey, and I will pass it off to Ron. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie, for your words of wisdom and for your powerful story. Good afternoon, everyone. Once again, my name is Ronald Wakini, and I am going to kind of present my life from my recent past. So with that, Liz, can we go to the first slide? In November of 2001, I found myself in the custody of the Oklahoma Department of Corrections, but let's backtrack a few decades. In 1981, I graduated from Elgin High School and barely graduated, not for the lack of so to say, smarts or capabilities. Things were too easy, so I did not apply myself, nor was I motivated. And some of my very dear friends had gotten into some real trouble back then, and they were asked to leave school. So I barely graduated, and I probably have ranked about right around 35, 40 out of a class of 80 or 85. So I was about midway. My 20s were an attempt to forget about my high school days. So my introduction to drugs and alcohol started in my early teen years, and then the use became pretty regular in my 20s. Now I had a failed marriage in my late 20s, early 30s. My two children, biological sons, were born during my 20s, and I found myself in my 30s trying to forget my 20s. So each decade was an attempt to try to erase and forget about the previous one. And my drug use progressed and got significantly worse. So in November of 2001, I found myself in the Oklahoma Department of Corrections with my second felony conviction, and I was sentenced to 15 years for trafficking in illegal drugs. And during session 2, I had mentioned that a jail cell or a prison cell has this innate magical capability of allowing that individual to prioritize their life. Once you're locked up and you're with yourself, everything becomes clear and important. Everything is laid out on what I should be doing. Now, once that door opens up, that priority and that magical capability is gone, and you're back out in the world, and then you're back right where you were going, or right in the activity that got you there in the first place. Now, for me, during this time, I was sentenced to 15 years, day for day, with trafficking, because there's no good time. So I wasn't getting out of this situation anytime soon. So this began my life of introspection, self-exploration, and trying to figure things out. So the first question that I had to grapple with was, what was most important in my life? And next slide, please, Liz. And the answer, much like everybody else, my children, of course. That was the most important thing in my life. And I was fooling myself, because when I look back and I'm thinking, okay, if this was the most important thing in my life, why am I sitting in a jail cell with a 15-year sentence in trafficking? So I had to become honest, and I had to go, okay, they were and are the most important portion of my life, but I allowed drugs and alcohol and my pain and anguish from years past to interfere with that. So my oldest son, right there in the middle, he is now 31, 32, and he's about 7 right here, maybe 6 or 7, first grade, second grade. He was 12, just turned 13 when I got arrested. So advance this picture about 4 years, and I was trying to look for some recent pictures and I couldn't find any. That's what happens when you get locked up for a significant amount of your life. Things kind of disappear and are lost. So the first empty frame is my biological father. Don't know, never met. saw a picture about 3 years ago, but for the sake of anonymity and his family doesn't know about me, I chose not to include that picture here. My youngest son, he is about 2 years younger than my oldest. And when their mother and I divorced and split up, my oldest came with me and my youngest stayed with his mother in Pennsylvania. And he is probably 29 or 30 now, and I have seen him once. And that was when my oldest got married about 6 years ago. So we don't have a relationship, and we probably never will through my life choices, and that's unfortunate. So I had mentioned before that I swore that I would never do what my biological father did to me. And by this one slide, you can see I've done exactly that. That's just unfortunate. And the guilt and remorse that I live with, and I try to forgive myself and move forward. And it's taken a long time. So next slide, Liz, please. Thank you. Now, I was raised by my grandmother for most of my life. These 4 points were taken from this study published in the Journal of Child and Family Study in 2021, and it's Native American parenting practices and philosophies. Now, this is the way I was raised with my grandmother. Your kids come first, because she always put me first. I enjoyed my childhood. I loved growing up in Southwest Oklahoma out in the country. It was the 70s for me were my favorite time. And it was just a joy to grow. That's when I first realized that I was Native too, because when we lived in Lawton and public schools there was a few Native kids there, not very many. And then we moved out to Elgin, and that's when I right out in the middle of Native communities. So I really became Native then. We were always watched closely, and if you grew up with a Native American grandmother, sometimes you know that they keep their thumb on you. And there was absolutely no drinking at the house when I grew up. Now, my second line on this up at the top, even the best plans can go bad. I was raised like this. I knew this. It was drilled into me, instilled into me, but I did not follow it when I became an adult and I became a parent. Next slide, please, Liz. The slide, the picture to the left there with the two gentlemen, that is my mom in the middle. Even though I was raised by my grandmother for the majority of my life, my mom was always a part of everything. She actually got the Indian home right next door to where my grandmother lived. And we still have those two houses out there in the country north of Lawton. The two gentlemen on the ends, they were actually my mom's nephew. Her sister passed away when they were young, so my grandmother took them all in and raised them. So white man way, white man way, conventional way, they're her nephews. Indian way, they're her brothers, because they were all similar in age. So they were my uncles. As we get older, they were grandpa, all of them. The center picture, this was taken probably about, I'm gonna say maybe 6 years ago, and I'd been released from prison probably 8 maybe or so years. And that's my uncle right next to him. And then on the picture on the right, that's them two again. These were my two father figures as I was growing up. They were my two adult male role models. Now, they experienced all of their own issues in that there was alcohol present. So this is where alcohol has been in our family for a long time. They were just living their life, and they didn't know I was watching and paying attention, but they were my adult male role models. So I attributed all of my good qualities to them and some of my bad ones, but I did most of the bad on my own. It did take a whole lot of effort to learn bad habits. Next slide, please, Liz. when I started to realize things were going awry during my years in prison, and I went through all of those stages of grief and loss, you know, anger, regret, remorse, bargaining. Then I finally came to acceptance. And when first time I started to really realize this is when my mom came to visit me for the first time in the prison visiting room, and she broke down in tears. And I'm like, oh. I'm like, okay, you did everything. You and grandma raised me right. I knew right from wrong. It was my decisions that got me here. And I promised her in that first visit that she would never have to come visit me in a prison setting again. And I am proud to say that I've lived up to that. I have done more since I was released in 2006 than I did my whole 38 years prior to going to prison. The center picture is Shauna, and the 4 girls are her biological children. They're my stepdaughters. The twins were in first grade when we got married. They're probably 16 or 17 in this picture. They're now 21. That is my oldest in the front there in the center picture. This is when he was reconnected with me. He was 12 when I got locked up. And this is what he looked like when we became reconnected. The picture on the left was this year at the spring game of the Oklahoma Sooners. My brother, my nephew, everybody, my oldest, his wife. And on the right, this is our whole crew now. It's gotten a little bit more, there's a few more additions as we'll see in a few minutes, but this is the crew as now. And my oldest and his wife aren't in this one. This was taken on an Easter. And next slide, Liz. Okay, here's where the story takes its positive twist. And I am able to reconcile with my past of the failures of being a bad parent, a parent that was incarcerated, a parent that spent his whole adult life involved in alcohol, drugs, and a party lifestyle. The little guy in the 2 pictures on the end, that's my little buddy. He was our first little half-breed. He's our grandson. He is not my biological grandson, but like the scene in Reservation Dogs, you're not my grandson, but you really are my grandson. He is mine. He is my buddy. We go everywhere together. He is my little mini me. And in the center picture, that's his little sister. She's our other little half-breed. And then we have Shauna, she's holding our newest, and he is not native whatsoever. He lives in his mom and dad, they moved down to Texas, and he is a welder by trade, so they moved down there. And his little nickname is Lone Star. So he'll be up this weekend, so we'll get to see him. Things have just kind of taken a very positive turn in my life. And when I was doing my self-reflection, I always said that I would do anything for my kids. I would really do anything for my kids. And when I finally got honest with myself, I was like, that wasn't always true. I always put drugs and alcohol ahead of my kids, and that was not fair to them. They didn't deserve that. All they wanted was a parent to be there, a parent to provide love, care, and the best support possible. And I didn't do that. But now I can honestly say I will do anything for these little guys right here. Okay, next slide, Liz. Here are some more little pictures. This is just some events out of recent. Our oldest, he will be 4 here coming up. And as you can see, he's with me all of the time. Mom and dad are actually nurses, so they work all kinds of these weird schedules. So from the moment they have been born, they have been at our house quite a bit. Every weekend we have them because mom and dad are nurses. They work overnight hours, shifts, they get called in sometimes. So our house has really become secondary home to them. We do everything together, and they're just my little pride and joys right now. That is the sunshine that I have in my life at the moment. And it's just going to get bigger because we have 2 more coming up. We have 2 more expected. All of the girls will have kids here by January. Okay, next slide, Liz. Some more pictures. As I have become a better person, a better adult, a better human being, a better parent, a better grandparent, it transcended into being a better brother, a better son, a better coworker, a better just all around human being. The center picture is my oldest and my younger brother. This was at Denver March this year. We have made plans. My oldest is now up there in Denver with his wife. They're doing really well. He just recently got his master's degree. We have a master's degree, 2 nurses, a teacher, and the twins. They're just still trying to find their way in life, and they're 21. But through all of my craziness and being a father to the 4 girls in their formative years and being absent from my oldest, everyone has really turned out really, really well, despite any kind of craziness that I may have put the family through decades ago. So I'm very thankful for that. I'm just very thankful that I finally figured out that it's not always about me, and it's not always my selfish desires, and it's not always what I want. There are people that are in my life that I have to think and put priority over my wants and desires. And I fail to do that, but I don't anymore. I am altruistic in all of my endeavors. If it's illegal, immoral, I will not become involved in it whatsoever. Last slide, Liz. I always like to, I am a old rock and roll. That was my go-to in the 70s, 80s. I love songs, I love music, I love lyrics. And this one from Meatloaf, I would do anything for love, but I won't do that. And if you know the song, he's expressing his love for his female, but he won't, in my opinion, fully commit to her. The song goes back and forth, but my kids, I would always do anything for my kids. I always said that they were the loves of my life. I would do anything for love, but I won't do that. I didn't want to quit my selfish behavior, and it finally got me a 15-year trafficking sentence. Now I can honestly say I will do anything for love. So my advice, don't fall victim to this song lyric. Always put your loved ones and your families above your selfish wants and desires. And thank you for allowing me to share my story with you. And with
Thank
that,
you. Oh my God, that is so powerful.
well,
Thank you,
thank you.
Ronald.
Thank you. And with that, I will pass it off to Cynthia.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cynthia. First slide, Liz. I won't get too much into my history. I kind of touched on that last time. And for timing, I will kind of condense that a little bit. But this is my grandma. She went through boarding school. She did have scars on her hands from the physical abuse that she went through while she was there. Next slide. The next slide is my mom. As she was growing up, she endured sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse. She ended up numbing her pain with drugs and alcohol. She didn't know how to be affectionate. She didn't know how to take care of us. And ultimately, she really just wanted to be loved. Next slide, please. These are my other grandparents. These are my father's parents. A lot of it was the secrecy. My family didn't want to talk about the past. It's something that was just off limits. Next slide, please. And this one is my father when he was young. My grandfather was always described as being hard. He physically abused my dad, and he criticized him quite a bit. He ended up numbing his pain with drugs, alcohol, and gambling. As a father, he was very critical and aggressive. Next slide, please. And this is my journey. And these are pictures from my last presentation. Next slide. So I was born in 1986 in Topeka, Kansas. When I was born, I had a sibling, an older sibling. He was 5 years older than me. My first memory of my parents were it was around Christmas time, and I remember my father got a phone call from my mom, and he was not happy about this phone call. He got really upset, and he was cooking spaghetti, and I remember him throwing the pan and the spaghetti being stuck to the wall. That's one of my very first memories. I later found out my mom had called him to let him know that she didn't want to be with him no more. And ultimately it ended in divorce in 1991. In 1994, my mom had another relationship, and she had my brother. And then my father had a different relationship, and he had another brother. And then in 1995 as well, my grandmother had passed away from breast cancer. And honestly, that's when I really seen my father start spiraling. Throughout my life, I attended 9 different elementary schools, 4 middle schools all over Kansas. I also went to school in California and Texas because my mom moved around so much. Next slide, please. Through 1996 and 1997, I was around ages 10, 11. My parents were both heavy in their addictions. My mom was addicted to crack cocaine, drinking, and men. My father was struggling with alcohol and gambling. Each of them would have big parties where there'd be a ton of people over. When I was at my mom's house, I remember I would go into our closet and I would lock the door so nobody would come in there to us. Next slide, please. My mom and my father would be arguing over who I was supposed to be with through the weekends. So then my mom, when it was her weekend, she would send me with my brother over to what she thought was my brother's father's house. And during that time, I was sexually abused. I would try to make excuses as to why I couldn't go over there. I would tell her I was sick. I would just try to get in trouble to where she wouldn't send me, but ultimately she would still send me over there. Sorry, guys. I finally ended up telling someone. When I was at school, my school counselor showed a video about good touch and bad touch. During that video, I wept because it was happening to me. And I didn't know how to tell my parents what was going on. And he was there, he provided safety. And he said, "Do you want to talk?" And I said, yes, I do. And he was like, "Tell me, well, why are you crying? What's going on?" And I told him what was going on. And from that, the police were called. He was arrested. He was ultimately convicted. But my relationships changed at that point. My father didn't know how to interact with me. My mom would get drunk and high. I feel like it pushed them even further into their addictions. One minute my mom would seem like she would believe me, but then the next minute she didn't. I had to transfer schools because while I was at school watching the video, everybody can tell something was going on with me. So my parents took me out of that school. Next slide. From that, I just wanted the pain to end. My older brother would go over to my grandpa's house and have his friends come over. They would smoke and they would drink outside and just hang out. And one night, I just wanted to join them. So I went out there and I asked him, and he thought it would be funny for me to do that. So I joined in with him. And I got close to blacking out that first time, and I was sexually assaulted that night by one of my brother's friends. At first, I enjoyed being numb from the alcohol and the smoke, but then the pain got worse with all the new trauma. This started a trend that I experienced throughout my life with many people in different situations. Next slide. This is me at age 13, 14. My mom would leave me at home with my little brother for weeks at a time. I would throw parties, have friends come over. One time I was taken to jail because I was outside the reservation at a club and I was trying to fight the bouncer, and they ended up calling the police and they took me to jail. From that, I was put on probation. I found out I was pregnant and I dropped out in middle school in 8th grade. Next slide, please. In March of 2002, I was age 14. I had my first child. I had complications since I was so tiny and he was such a big baby. I had him naturally and they had to use a suction cup just to pull him out. He had 2 seizures when he was born, and from that, he didn't have any other issues medically with him. When I first seen him, I fell in love. I thought he was the most perfect thing I had ever seen in my life. My son's father and I did not work out. We were on and off throughout his life. Next slide. For me, life as a parent, I did not know how to be a mom. After having my son at age 15, I ended up partying with my parents, with my family, with everyone. I was a full-blown alcoholic. I felt like I needed to drink at all times. I would have parties at my house while my son was there, just like my parents did with me. He has witnessed many drunk rages and chaos. I loved him, but my definition of love at that time is not what it is today. I sold drugs to survive. I was in and out of unhealthy relationships. I experienced sexual abuse and domestic violence through my life. I really just kind of had an I don't care attitude. I didn't care what anybody else thought about me. I was known as a fighter. And when I wanted to go out, I would just find a babysitter. I would go to the clubs and go to my cousin's bar and I would sell meth. And I hate to say this, but my mom was actually one of my biggest customers when it came to meth. She continued to use crack and any other drug that she could get her hands on. This was our family dynamics. It was toxic, but this is my truth. And this is a picture of me, my mom, and my cousin. Next slide. I was a very angry person. I did not know how to parent. I did not know how to respect myself or to respect others. I would rationalize my usage and tell myself to slow down or stop. But the truth was I couldn't. Next slide. In 2011, at age 25, as I was growing up, I had 3 serious relationships, including my son's father. In 2011, my boyfriend of 3 years kept trying to get me to have a child with him. For years, I told him no because I did not want any more kids. I had my son and he had 2 kids that didn't live with us. I finally said okay, and as soon as I got pregnant, he became physically abusive with me. This abuse escalated and I tried to get away from him. I left the house because we couldn't afford the rent anymore and I wanted to flee. I had our daughter and was living in our hotel room with my kids. I was at a loss and I didn't know what to do. I tried having my parents take my kids, but they wanted me to stop drinking and selling drugs, and I didn't want to give that up at that time. I just wanted to party. I wanted the pain to end. I just wanted to give up. I felt as though I had nowhere to turn. Next slide, please. In 2012, I hit my rock bottom. But this was the moment that changed everything for me. I ended up leaving my 10-year-old son and my 6-month-old daughter with my mom and my friend. I was running around with my new boyfriend, and we were drinking and doing drugs together. I ended up making a horrible choice and was arrested. After I was arrested, I found out that I was 2 weeks pregnant with my new boyfriend's child. I was facing decades of imprisonment and I didn't know what to do. I realized I had lost everything. At that moment in time, I didn't even know how I got to that point. I was angry and broken, and I didn't know what to do. Next slide, please. This is the last picture I have of my kids before I was sentenced to 4 to 5 years in prison. While in prison, I started taking every self-betterment class offered, including parenting classes. I dug deeper and wanted to connect spiritually. I turned to what I knew, which was Christianity and Native ways. I would attend church services and Bible study. I would then turn around and attend Native services. I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about my trauma and the dysfunction of my parenting. I learned how my addiction kept me away from ceremonies and my spiritual connection. I was always taught to stay away from ceremonies when you were under the influence, which was something that was pretty consistent in my life. I was on a mission to learn something new. I knew that my life could be different. I just didn't know how. I had my youngest daughter and was given the opportunity to keep her in prison with me. I chose to keep her there. I had no idea where I would have sent her if she had to leave. My family was still doing the same things they always have. Next slide. I promise it gets better, guys. In 2014, there was new beginnings for me. When I was coming up for parole, I had to face my fears and make one of the toughest decisions of my life. I'm from Kansas, so I was here in Nebraska during this time when I was imprisoned. I wrote my mom a long letter letting her know that I was choosing to stay in Nebraska instead of going back to Kansas. I let every word that I had held back in my past flow onto the paper as I wrote. I told her how angry I was and that I wanted something different in my life, but that meant that I had to give up my old life, which included our toxic relationship. My family did not understand, but they knew I had already made my mind up. They felt that I was being selfish since I was allowed to come back to Kansas and I was choosing to go into a treatment program without having any resources or anyone I knew here in Nebraska. I was released without any money, any resources, any clothes, any supplies, other than what I had through prison. I did not know how I was going to make it. I just knew I was ready to do something different and something right for myself and my kids. I can tell you it was not all flowers and sunshine. It was hard work, and it hurt being away from my kids in Kansas, knowing that I could go back. This picture was my youngest and my oldest. This was taken in 2014 at the treatment program I was at. This was my first visit with my son after being released. He was able to come up for the weekend with us and spend time. During this time, I tried to see my older daughter, but my friend told me that she was better off without me and that I would be the worst thing in her life, and I just needed to stay away. Next slide, please. In 2015, I was reunited with all of my kids. This is the first photo that I have of us all together. I fought in a very long battle in court. I had no money since I was in an inpatient treatment center. I couldn't work. So I had to file pro se. And when I went to court, I was alone in Kansas. My family was still using, so I did not have much positive support outside of my new community in Nebraska. I eventually was awarded custody and successfully completed treatment. I was released from parole and living this new life. I had a job, I had a house, I had a vehicle, and for the first time in my life, I felt happy. I was rebuilding and restructuring my relationships with my family and others. I had a lot of healing to do and a lot of boundaries to learn, but I knew I was ready. Reintegration with my daughter was not easy. She had a lot of emotional and attachment issues. She had gone through trauma while she was with my friend. My son was angry with me. I spent many hours and days rebuilding trust and love between us. I acknowledged him. I allowed him to ask me whatever he wanted, and I owned my mess. And I was honest about my past. I acknowledged all of his feelings and processed through the hurt that I had done to him. Even in the moments where I believed something happened differently, I accepted his view on the situation because it was true and it was real to him. Next slide, please. To fast forward, throughout the years, I have been working on my parenting with my children. My youngest has never seen me drunk or high. She is a fancy Shaw dancer. She's there in the picture, all the way on the right and in the middle. Her personality can cheer anyone up, and she is full of light. She is very intelligent and is in the gifted program. My oldest daughter, she is doing really well. She has anxiety issues, but we have several techniques to work through this and to ground her. She is thriving in school and at home. She's very talented, and she's also a jingle dress dancer. My son is becoming an amazing young man. He was not making the best decisions in Kansas, so he asked to come live with me. Since moving in, he has graduated high school and he is currently working full-time. He is also going to college. Another person in this slide is my mom. I am proud to say that not only is generations being changed after me, but she's now a year sober. She's doing very well. Her and I have a very good relationship. We are working on boundaries. We are working on forgiveness. She is a positive person in my kids' lives as well. Next slide, please. Guys, I am crying. Today, I am over 10 years sober. I'm continuing to walk through my healing journey. I'm far from perfect and will always be a work in progress. I'm currently going to school for a degree in social work. I am working towards breaking the cycle of addiction and trauma for all generations. Next slide, please. And with that, I want to say thank you guys for listening to me, and I will pass it to Raquel.
So once again, I'm Raquel Ramos, and last week, where am I? So last week I talked about my parents and how I was parented. I talked about how I didn't realize until my mom had passed away that there was 10 years of my life of not being with my mom. And so just a really quick background of before, for some that weren't here last week. I was born in New York City in the borough of Manhattan. My mom and dad's name is Gustavo and Peggy. My dad was full-blood Cuban. He was born in Havana, and my mom is full-blood Comanche, born in Lawton. We moved to Passaic, New Jersey when I was a baby and remained there until I was 11 years old. At the age of 11, my two brothers and I moved to Oklahoma with my mom. There's many years of my childhood that I don't remember, like when my parents divorced and most of going to school from kindergarten to the 5th grade. My past experiences are with my paternal grandparents. I could remember everything good in my life with my paternal grandparents. I could remember birthday parties. I could remember holidays. I could remember just good. And I think that that's probably why I didn't realize that my mom wasn't there and during that time. But I noticed that as I went through all of my pictures, I couldn't find any with my mom in them. You know, I found them with my dad, but not with my mom. But not to say that my mom was not my saving grace whenever I got older. I could also remember a dark past whenever I was with my, not so much with my grandparents, but with my dad. I could remember sexual abuse from the time that I was probably in kindergarten up until before I went to my mom's. I could remember physical abuse from my dad's girlfriend. I could remember I could just remember a lot of dark times also. But for some reason, I want to say that my grandparents just really, you know, were my light back then. And I didn't realize in my third picture with my mom and myself and my two brothers, that's whenever my life kind of changed, because my mom was my saving grace. She did everything from the time that I was 11 years old until the time that she passed to make my life good, to do the best that she could to raise us. My mom never knew about my abuse until I was an adult, and I never told my dad. At the age of 15, I had my first daughter. My mom became my primary caregiver for my daughter as I continued going to high school. I played basketball, but I also started consuming alcohol, and from time to time, I would smoke marijuana. And so I want to say that it was during my high school time that, you know, I really didn't fit in. The school that I went to, I was the only native in my class. It was a little country town. And coming from New York, New Jersey to Oklahoma was a big change for me. I was used to just, I don't know how to explain it. For one, the culture shock was huge, but that's just how it was. So there's myself and my mom. And then come my senior year, my mom made sure that me and my brothers graduated from high school. And it was during my senior year that I met my 3 younger kids' dad. At the time, I was 17, he was 35. And at the time, I didn't think that there was, you know, anything wrong with it because, you know, at 17, I was in love. I didn't realize at that time that this may not be right, but I know that my mom always would say, no, you know, you can't do that. But I was so headstrong that it didn't matter what she said. I eventually left the small town that I grew up in and I moved to Lawton. But in that move, I didn't take my 3 younger kids with me. My kid's dad ended up keeping them. And during that time, I was in my early 20s. I started drinking. I started partying. I started doing drugs. And it was really crazy because during that time, I kept telling myself, man, I sure am a good parent. Man, I'm just really, really a good mom. I've got to be a good mom because my kids aren't seeing me use alcohol. My kids aren't seeing me use drugs. And then whenever reality finally set in later on in my story, it was just the plain simple fact that it was just easier for me to do what I wanted to do, to be who I wanted to be, and to have no responsibilities. In 2001, I received a call that my in 2001, I received a call that my youngest son had passed away due to an accident. The guilt, the shame, the hate that I had for myself was unbearable. Drugs became easier. I was already out of control, but I really spiraled out of control after that. And then by the grace of God, by the grace of the Creator, I found myself facing felony charges. I was looking at 47 years in prison, 20 in, 20 out with the CS7. And it didn't matter because it was more of a suicide looked really good to me at that point in my life before facing my prison. But I was even still too ashamed or too scared to even do that. My low point was going to prison and watching my oldest grandson come and visit me. They would have this once a month on Saturdays. The kids can, ride a bus to go to visit us. And I lived in Lawton. And at that time, I was in Muskogee. And so my grandson at the age of 5, 6, 7, he would just bring his little thing of quarters and just come see me. So that's how I watched him grow up. And then the rest of my grandkids, I watched them grow up through pictures and newspaper clippings because they played sports and, everything always went into the newspaper. And pretty much that's how I watched them grow up. But then I finally realized that I have to change. Kind of like Ron said, after you get done with being mad and pissed off, and after you're done blaming everybody else and start looking at self, I had a shift in my mindset. These are some of the pictures that we were able to take while we were incarcerated that I would send home to my family. I became a part of the Native American Women's Club while I was there. I had an opportunity to start bringing back sweat lodges to the facility. I started going to college while I was in prison.
I was on the, and you know, and this may seem really crazy, but you know, we had a inmate council and I was the president of the inmate council. And I didn't realize back then that this is what the Creator was doing to prepare me to come home for such a time as this, to speak to others. My whole mentality changed towards the last part of my sentence. I was able to be there, but not be there because I had a purpose and a plan. I knew and I refused to leave that place the same way I came in. I refused to leave that place the same way I came in. And I told myself time and time again that things are going to have to change. And so what made me decide to change and what caused a positive shift in my life was to tell that little girl in the picture that everything wasn't your fault. And that you are somebody. And that you are important. And so as I was gone, sorry, I practiced this and I told myself I wouldn't cry, I'm sorry. So as I came home, I prayed all the time. I prayed all the time. Don't let me leave this place the same way I came in. And God told me one day, you're going to go home before Christmas. And I just have to tell this little piece of this story. He said, you're going to go home before Christmas. And I'm like, and I knew it. I believed it. I believed it. And you're not going to go home the same person. And I truly believed it. And as the year that I got out, as the time grew closer, Thanksgiving came and everybody would say, oh, they're not going to release anybody anymore. You know, they're not going to release anybody anymore. And I'm like, oh yeah, they are, because I'm going home Christmas Eve, or I'm going home on Christmas. I'm going home before Christmas. Thanksgiving went, I didn't go home. They're not going to do it until January. Got closer and closer to Christmas and they called me down to the office on December 23rd. And they told me that, you know, pack your stuff, you're going home. And consistency and commitment in changing my life and getting to know my kids. I came home on Christmas Eve. This is and the picture with my mom and my oldest daughter and 3 of my grandkids. That's Christmas Eve. The other big picture, that's our family. Christmas 2 years ago. My healing journey is being able to have my mom and dad see that I wasn't the person that I had turned out to be in my active addiction. Marrying the love of my life, Donnie. And the bottom picture is my entire family being at my wedding, my kids and my grandkids. And where I'm at in my healing journey today and how I'm parenting because of my experiences is passing on what I have. You know, while I was incarcerated, I think the hardest thing that I ever done while I was there is hearing all of the young girls coming in and crying at night and laying there and feeling hopeless and not knowing, them not knowing what they were going to do. And I told myself over and over, you let me go home, I'm going to make a difference in this world. And I'm going to do everything I can to keep all of our young women out of these facilities. And so I started working in the field of prevention. And in my career, me and Ronnie and Melanie, that's on this call, have made leaps and bounds across the United States. And today, all of my grandkids I have 17. My great-grandchild and great-grandchild to be, none of them have ever seen their grandmother doing drugs and or alcohol. They all can call on me. They all know where I'm at. My house is the safe house, and you know, I'm just a grandma now. I'm just a grandma. So my kids were already raised by the time I came home, but today I raise my grandkids in a good way. So I just want to let everybody know that might wonder where they're at in their life today, is that you are not alone, and I believe in you, because if I can do it, because at one time I thought I was the lowest of the low, but if I can do it, anybody can do it. Thank you for listening. I'm going to pass it on to somebody. Sorry, Listina.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that. Good afternoon, everybody. I had to light my medicine because what we've been sharing has been kind of heavy on me. I can relate to everybody's story here, and it touches my heart. So I want to thank everybody for sharing today. So I came up with this quote, and it's very significant to me. It's life is a grand entry. Life is a grand entry. It should say life is a powwow. Make a grand entry and dance your style. So I invite everyone to listen to my story today, and I'm going to be vulnerable as I tell my story. I have a picture of my moccasins here today, and they remind me of like my journey, because my journey is mine, and just like these moccasins are mine, nobody's wore them before, and they don't look as new as this now, but they're mine. So I was born in Yankton, South Dakota, the 5th out of 8 children. I was named after an uncle that passed away the year before I was born. And sometimes I think that maybe my mom was in her mornings, well, she had to have been in her morning stage when she was pregnant with me. And this is me as a baby, and my grandma Alice, and me again. So I want to touch on the conditions of how I grew up in, how this affected my cognitions, and how it came to affect my choices. So during the ages of 0 to 7, some of the significant events that happened to me as a child were I was sexually abused, either like I want to say I was maybe 4 or 5 years old when that happened. And that trauma stayed with me for a very long time. And as a result of that, I made some poor choices because I didn't learn how to process that. And I didn't learn that I had complex trauma until I was an adult. So some of the things that I seen as a kid was I grew up in an alcoholic home. My dad was in and out of my life. I want to say when I was about 6 years old, that was the last time I seen him as a kid until I was 26 years old. There was no holidays that were really celebrated in our home between the ages of 0 to 7 because my mom was an alcoholic, and when she wasn't an alcoholic, the religion that she participated in didn't accept celebrating holidays. And we were very poor. So one of my childhood memories and one of the biggest feelings that I felt during this stage of my life was shame. And I remember, I don't know how I knew, but as a kid, I knew about alcoholism. I knew about drunken bums, and I knew that these alcoholic bums or homeless people would come into our home, and my mom would hang out with them. And I remember as a kid, one of them took me to buy a pair of shoes, and it was a happy moment, but it was also a moment in time where I felt that shame. And, you know, as a result of that, like I would grow up wearing clothes that these homeless people took from the local Goodwill box and brought to our house. But like, because we lived in such poverty, like I remember having a pair of boots that were cute and that I really liked that they had brought. And my grandma, rest in heaven, my grandma Alice, she was very instrumental in my childhood, because even though I had the alcoholism going on in the home and the sexual abuse going on in the home, whenever I went to her, I always felt nurtured. I always felt loved. She bathed me, she clothed me, she gave me food. And she just had this way, that grandmas do, of loving. And I always felt safe in her house. And when she passed, that was the biggest heartache of my life. And I think it was so hurtful, because she was like my stronghold as a child. And I knew that I could go to her with anything. And when she left, it devastated me as a kid. And all of my grandparents were significant, really. Like my mom's parents were significant too. Because between the ages of 7 and 15, this middle picture here is when I went into the powwow arena. And I can remember going to the reservation where they lived in Nebraska, and just going to the powwows there and seeing them. And they would come to our home too, and they would like show their love. I remember one time they bought a birthday cake, and they gave me a birthday card with some change. And there's probably only a few birthdays that I remember having as a kid where I was celebrated. And one of them was with my grandma Alice. She surprised me and took me to McDonald's, and that's like the biggest birthday that I remember having as a kid, maybe one of the only ones. And the other one would have been where my other grandparents gave me some change in a card. So between the ages of 7 and 15, some of the events that I went through was I lost my grandma Alice. I remember that day being in 3rd grade and being called out of the classroom and being told that she was sick and going up to the hospital, and thinking she would come out of the hospital alive, and that I'd be able to go back to her house and be able to resume our normal festivities of her taking us to the senior center and just caring for us. But that didn't happen, and she ended up passing. And I think at that point, that was the first time that I felt depressed. And in hindsight, like, nobody was there. The normal traits of growing up in an alcoholic home are you don't really talk about emotions, and things just aren't really brought out in the open. So I remember when I was crying for her, a lot of people just kept telling me to stop crying, hush, be quiet. And nobody really helped me to process through that grief. And I think that's why to this day, like, I still miss her a lot. And I'm working to do something significant that's going to help me heal from that. And another key part was when I went to her funeral. I looked for my dad, and that's my dad's mom. And I expected him to be there, and he wasn't there. And so that's another instance where I felt like I was abandoned. And I didn't identify that as abandonment as a kid, but as an adult, when I look back on it, it just reminds me of how he walked out. And basically I felt like he never looked back, and that just transcended into adulthood as me having that trauma, having that abandonment by my father. So some of the other things that I was witnessing as I grew up was domestic violence, family chaos, arguments. And I remember I always wanted my mother to be there, but she wasn't, because of her alcoholism and because of the choices that she made. And I remember that one time I went with my mom, and she walked to an AA meeting, and I remember waiting outside. And other things that I remember doing as a kid was like feeding myself and being hungry and, wanting something to eat, and there wasn't anything. So I just remember eating peanut butter out of a jar to help my hunger and just to take care of myself. And so when my dad would come, he would never stay. He would just stop in at my mom's house to eat, see my mom or see my brother. And then he just eventually stopped coming around. And his sisters, who are my aunts, they would stop by and they would take care of me or take me out, and I really enjoyed that. But through the ages of 7 to 15, there was just more alcoholism, more disappointments. My mom would take me into the bars with her when I was like 11 years old, and I would see my mom have a lot of house parties, and sometimes she would actually try to fight me or she would hit me. I wouldn't hit back, but I do remember being very hurt by this when I was about maybe 10 or 11 years old. And so I remember one time when I was like, I want to say I was like 11 years old, and I felt really depressed and I felt really sad about the condition of that I was in, like with my mom and her alcoholism. So I consumed a bunch of pills. And after I did that, I regretted it. And they took me up to the emergency room, these church people did, that I called. And I remember I had my stomach pumped. But at 11 years old, like I was so sad and just so tired of like seeing all this alcoholism and just feeling empty and feeling that shame. And then having that sexual abuse that wasn't dealt with. Like everything just felt really heavy on my heart as a child. So I tried that, but it wasn't successful. And I just remember feeling very hurt and alone. I ran away at that age. And then at the age of 15, which would have been the far right picture of me, I think I was 14 there. But at the age of 15, I got pregnant with my oldest daughter, and I was in the 8th grade, and I ended up dropping out of school then. And I dropped out of school. I had my daughter, and this is my daughter, or this is when I was pregnant with my daughter in this picture. And I actually started using substances at about this time. I remember I first used meth after I had her, which was at the age of 16, and she was 2 months old. And I left her to go party with my friends, and they had some meth and they put it out on the table, and I remember snorting some, and then immediately I remember like wanting some more, so I snorted some more. And then I don't remember too much about what happened after that, but I do remember waking up in the ICU at the hospital and being told that I had an overdose on meth and had a grand mal seizure, and that I was lucky to be alive, and that I didn't have permanent like brain damage after that. But I just remember them bringing my baby, my oldest, to me. And it was embarrassing, and it just didn't, I don't know what I was thinking back then, but it just didn't feel too good to have a 2-month-old trying to come into the ICU and the nurses saying that there was no babies allowed. But then that didn't even stop me, like in my addictions. So then after that, I went back to drinking, smoking weed, and eventually meth again. And the AA Big Book talks about like that jaywalker that doesn't learn after being hit by the car several times. And that was me with my addictions to a T. So I ended up having my son at the age of 17. And then I went and got my GED, and for a short time, like I was doing good. I was working at a fast food restaurant, and their dad ended up getting sent to prison because he was older and he was messing with younger girls, and I was much younger than him also. So he went to prison for that, and I was stuck being a single mom and trying to juggle like working and taking care of these 2 kids that were right in a row. And eventually I got involved in my addictions too hard and too heavy, and I basically abandoned my kids in favor of drugs. And from the ages of 25 to 32, my life was about jails, treatments, and state prison. And I actually started using meth harder and started using alcohol harder. And there was a point in time too where I had alcohol poisoning, and somebody seen me stumbling around on the streets, and they called the police, and the police took me. And I once again woke up in the hospital. And when I left that hospital, I opened my purse, and there was a piece of paper. It was like that heart monitor paper. And I don't know who put it there, but it had like a heart reading, and then a flat line, and then a heart reading again. So I think maybe that a nurse probably put it there to show me something, but that still didn't stop me from going back into hardcore addiction and going back to drugs, going back to meth, while my mother took care of my kids. So I eventually signed over guardianship to my mom under her direction because she didn't want her grandkids in the system. And it was actually when my oldest was born that my mother sobered up, like she quit drinking, and she got more involved in my children's life. And she turned out to be like a good grandma because she's taking care of my kids and my grandson. And then I want to say that when I went to federal prison, that was my turning point. I was given 60 months in prison and 60 months outside for conspiracy to distribute methamphetamine. And I don't think that I was a big time drug dealer or anything like that. If anything, I was doing that to support my addictions, because at that point I was heavily addicted to methamphetamine. So I go to federal prison, and while I'm in there, I miss my kids, obviously, and I fall into a deep depression. And then after being in depression for about a year, I thought to myself, I don't want my time away from my kids to be in vain. So I'm gonna, take a lot of self-help groups, educate myself, and do what I can while I'm in here. So I went into federal prison at the age of 28, came out at the age of 31. And I remember one time, like as we're sitting in the jail cells and playing cards, this girl says, "Dang, you're getting old now," because I turned 31 in there. She's like, "It seems like when you came in here, you were in your 20s." And it was true. And I feel like I did a lot of self-work while I was in there. I did their treatment programs, the NRDAP and the RDAP, and then I came out. And then I actually relapsed on alcohol, even though I had completed those treatments. And that was back in 2012. And then in 2013, I went to treatment, outpatient treatment, and I decided, well, it's been a daily maintenance thing, but since then I have stayed sober. And after that, after I got out of federal prison, I was working at a hotel, and I got tired of working there. And I thought to myself, there's got to be more to life than this. So I went to the Native American Workforce Development Center, and she put me in touch with a lady at the reentry program, which is at the community college here in Omaha, Nebraska. And I got started on my education to be a substance abuse counselor. And I graduated from there in 2017 because I only went part-time, and I actually got pregnant with my youngest daughter in 2015 and had her in 2016, and happened to get released from federal probation during that time. And during the course of that time, like so much happened. And if I hadn't decided, or I feel like if I hadn't gotten pregnant, I don't know where I would be at, because I was thinking to myself, I can do whatever I want, I can go wherever I want, and I'm free. And then I got pregnant with Gracie, and I think that was a blessing, really, because I didn't envision myself having kids again. And even though things didn't work out between me and her father, I still have her. And she has been such a blessing in my life. And as a result of this newfound chance at parenthood, parenthood. I would say that I've become a sober parent. She's 6 years old, going on 7. She's never seen me drunk. She's never seen me high. And she helps me to want to be a better person. And 4 years ago, I didn't have, but my oldest daughter had my grandson, Avon. And I was able to be there for his birth and to give him his first bottle. And I've walked with them since then, and I'm a sober grandma, and I'm able to give him the things that I never had as a kid too. I'm able to take him shopping when I want to, or, take them to a fun event, or do things, take them to a powwow and do these things with them, which is a blessing because, I could not have been here because of the results of my choices that I made back then, but here I am. I've been sober going on 9 years, and I'm in college now for my master's degree, and I got my bachelor's degree after I got my associate's, so I kept going and I didn't give up. And I want to say there was times when I felt like giving up because that old voice in my head would say, well, you dropped off in 8th grade, you don't deserve to go to college, you don't deserve this. But I just kept on going. And about 2 years ago, I met my husband, and that was a blessing. And he doesn't drink or do drugs or do anything. And so he's like a really nice guy, so different than the kind of guys that I dated, the abusive guys, controlling guys. Like my husband's so calm and laid back and accepting, forgiving, loving, patient, everything. And he's a good stepfather to Gracie and a good step grandpa to my grandson Avon and to my oldest kids. And then this is a picture of me and Gracie on the left-hand corner. And then that's my husband, me and Gracie, when we went to Chicago last year to visit his brother. And then the other picture is my oldest daughter, my grandson Avon, Gracie, me, and my son. My oldest kids are 24 and 25 now, and they may have their experiences with alcohol, but they're still surpassing me in things. They both graduated high school. My son has an associate's degree, and my daughter has a cosmetology license, and they're both doing good things with themselves, and I'm very proud of them today. And then the picture on the far right is Gracie and my grandson at the zoo. The last time he was here in Omaha, I took them both to the zoo and we just had a good time. And I will end that with self-care. I have to take care of myself to be at my best. And a few of my favorite quotes are, you are loved, you are blessed, you are enough, you are resilient, you are brilliant. You are creative and you are unstoppable. And the other one is by Joseph Marshall, and it's the strength of a tree, the old ones say, comes not from growing thicker in the good years when there is water, but from staying alive in the bad and dry times. So I just want to thank everybody for listening to my story. Now I'll pass to Ronaldo.
Okay, thank you. It's one of those things when you come last and you hear everybody's story that you're just really grateful for the life that you do have. Go ahead and go to the first slide. I know last week I talked a little bit about my family, and as I have proceeded to continually look at my life and go back, I've been reminded many times of how I was protected, not only by the Creator, but it has been one of those things that I never really realized is the trauma or the traumatic things that have happened, but I've also seen the good things. And, my grandparents, my maternal grandparents, Ella and Charlie Morgan, were really key in raising me. And because my mother worked quite a bit, and she worked for the Bureau of Indian Affairs and worked for the boarding school when we moved to Crown Point. We moved all over the reservation a little bit, Shiprock, Chinle, and Navajo. And then eventually ended up in Crown Point, New Mexico, where my mom was a dorm manager, and we got one of the BIA housing house to live in, and she was paying for that through whenever she would work. And my mom is pictured down below with me, a little older there. And then my father, my paternal grandparents on the picture all the way to the right side, my grandmother, Marie Warito, and my grandfather, Chad, is way in the back. And then my my father is sitting right up front in the glasses, very similar to mine. But, and then my aunts are pictured there all to the left of my father's sisters. And then in the middle is just a picture of my siblings as we grew up and got older. My stepfather came in, and there's my mom right in the middle there in the black and white photo. But my mom had a very traumatic life in going to boarding school. And then also my father, who's pictured down below, in his older years, both attended boarding school. And life for me was hard because I was the oldest born and had two sisters younger than I. But my father was one that was in and out of my life throughout. Go to the next slide. So my parenting, and there's my father up top with my mom, and there am I, my sister Linda, and then Toy, the little girl. But this is one of the only photos that we have of our little family when my dad was around. My mom had she had 4 girls with my father. And then I mentioned my sister Carmen, who should have been between my sister Linda and my little sister Toy, died when she was 6 months old from crib death. And I remember my mom, when she came, we had a babysitter at that time. We were playing outside, and we had the babysitter contacted her. But I remember my mom running home that day and going into the room and finding my little sister not being able to move, and eventually had to drive her to the hospital. So one of the sad realities when you're living on the reservation is the hospital was so far away. And then the photo below tells a little bit more. My parents divorced when I was about 10 years old. And so my early years, excuse me, my dogs are running around. But in my, when my dad was at home, I remember the many things he taught us. We've always had animals, and we had a dog all the time, and we had fish, we had a pet skunk. My dad would go hunting, and we would have various meats in a refrigerator out in the garage. And he was bow hunting, and he would do a lot of things with his hands. And as I grew up, the one thing I remember of my father was he made a basketball goal for me in the front yard, and then he made one in the back. And then we would go out there and shoot for a while, and didn't really know whether or not we would play basketball, but it became one of my favorite things to do when I could leave the house or go play with friends. But then, like I said, my parents divorced when I was 12. My mother down below, when the divorce occurred, there was a situation, and I never really realized, because my parents and my great grandparents, and with the long walk, and then my grandmother losing her parents during the influenza, and then both of my parents going to boarding school, losing their parents, and this trickling of abandonment that would occur. It's when you look back, you realize that there's these similarities. And when I was about 10 years old, and my parents were on this verge of divorcing, on the weekends, my dad would come and watch us. And then during the week, my mom would be there, and she would leave the house and go stay with her boyfriend at the time. And then my dad would come in. Well, I remember this 2 weekends. My parents weren't communicating with one another, and we had no parents for 2 weeks. And I was 10 years old. And I remember trying to feed my sisters. My little sister Linda had a paper route. We would use the money to find food. And I remember recalling every time I would go to the window, watching the cars from way far away and hoping, it would be my mom or my dad. But we were alone for 2 weeks, and I never realized how bad that was for us. But I also didn't realize the abandonment that came with that. So it was one of those things when my mom finally returned and talked about where she was, but they never mentioned anything to us about where they were and what happened. Life just went on. And that was a very traumatic point, but it was one of these things too, being the oldest daughter, they just expected you to take care of things. And so I had to take care of my sisters a lot. And even with my father, and when he started to become very violent, it was protecting my mother. So one of the things my mother would constantly do when we were alone at the house and when she was going to boarding school, she always had a list, cleaning the house and making sure everything was done. We had seasonal cleaning and all her, I often said that we never had cockroaches in our house because our mom was so clean, they could smell bleach a mile away. But my mom was very, everything had to be clean. There was very little communication, but the one thing I can tell you that my mother brought to the house that was joyful was her playing the piano. We had a piano there and she would always play it, and we heard movie soundtracks from the Pink Panther, from Love Story, from Breakfast at Tiffany's. So then we would see these movies and we could relate the music to the movies. And then we eventually all went into band. I was in band and clarinet and did everything I could. I loved music. And we lived there in this small community in the BIA housings to where it was one of those things from kindergarten to 12th grade where I didn't have to move or leave. So that was one of the fortunate events of having consistency with my parents. I played sports. Didn't realize when I went into 8th grade, I was probably about 5'9" by that time. Coach came to me and wanted me to run track and for the varsity. And I was like, I'm not a runner. But I ran the 400 one time, and my first race, and they told me, when you hear the gun, just take off as fast as you can. And so then when that gun went off, I took off and I was waiting for others to pass me. Didn't realize I was a whole stretch ahead. And it was that day I realized that I was going to be good at sports if I chose to do it. My mom was a great cook. She always cooked us breakfast in the morning, even though when she was gone. And once I would watch and see her cook, I took on the responsibility of cooking for my sisters when my mom wasn't around. But it was one of those things, even when I started to play sports in high school, I was in the papers, I was doing all this. And then I was a 4.0 student. I was just a driver in my own life because of everything I've been through. But the other thing with my father, I also became very angry as time would pass because of the responsibilities I was taking from him and not realizing it. Next slide. Trying to make sure I'm doing this right. So one of the major developments in my life was I left home at 18 years old for college. I graduated in 1981. I got a basketball scholarship. I dropped out of college my junior year. And it was a hard time because at 19, I broke away from my family when I left for college and was just realizing how much as the oldest born that I no longer wanted to follow in what they wanted me to do, because everybody always called me a good girl. You're a good girl, you obey, you don't get into trouble, you don't do all these things, and you take care of your sisters. But it was one of the things that really hurt me down the road because I was tired of being the good girl. So when I finally broke through, I started partying. I started, doing all these things in college. And then by the time in my junior year, when I left college, and the reason I left was because I got raped. It was a time, I'm 5'11" and a half, almost 6 feet tall. And I was one of these individuals that always had this power to do things. And then with my dad leaving and the anger that I accrued in college when I was playing ball, that even got me more angry. And I eventually became this person who could literally beat anyone. And I was beating up men. I was beating up girls in college and when I was playing ball, and I was fighting a lot. And then when I turned 24 years old, I was, I finally decided when I dropped out and made things so bad for myself, I went home. And one of the rules my mom had when I returned home was you need to go to church. If you're going to stay under my roof, you go to church. But in my growing up years, we always went to church. That was one of the things that was grounding for us a little. But the other reason for my parents divorcing was my dad was very traditional in Navajo. So they would always fight about where the girls were going to go to church. I will take them to see their grandmother. But it was this battle that was going on. But eventually I got involved in the church. I got involved in single. I did all of these things in the ministry work. And then I eventually got married and met a man at 26 years old. And then I got married at 28, had this huge wedding, Christian, and my husband was Navajo and Jewish. So by the time I turned 29 years old, I had my first child. It was very different than my mother, who had her first child at 20. And then I had a sister who had her first child at also 20. And then eventually down the years, I would have my second at 30 and my third at 34. I was very fortunate then because I was older and I did a lot of things when I was younger. But it was also one of the things when I did have my first child. And second, we were living in Albuquerque and then eventually left and moved to Washington, D.C. with all of my 3 kids. And then we moved to Denver. And then we stayed there quite a while. And then we went back to DC. And then we were going to find a house in Colorado. And I decided to stay on the reservation for 6 months with my mom until we found a place in Denver. Next slide. So my children were all born. And the one thing that these guys were my saving grace. Nabahi, Shandin, and Natani, they all have Navajo names because I, as one who grew up on the reservation and didn't know the language, was often told I didn't belong. So I decided to name them their first names Navajo. If they ever went back, they would always be welcomed. And I can tell you they are. They always come to me like, Mom, somebody knows my name, and they say they know I'm Navajo. And I go, well, they know these are very powerful names. Their middle names are Hebrew. So I made sure that there was a balance and that their Hebrew names were also a big identity for them. And they're every bit their names. Next slide. And this is them as they got older. But the one thing I realized in raising my children that was going to be different, and what was very fortunate, even though their dad was working, so I had afforded the opportunities to stay at home. And I was with them all the time. And the one thing I'd learned, my oldest son, Natani's the second one there with the OK symbols. When he was 7 years old, he was diagnosed with a disability, and it was ADHD. And then down the road, he became diagnosed and being gifted. And then eventually all 3 of my children were gifted too. So I just really, because I had the time to stay home, I studied and learned about their disabilities. I created a home environment for them to be able to play music. My oldest son plays the cello, and he's very gifted in music. My daughter played guitar, went all state in guitar. My youngest son plays electric guitar, and they've all learned how, it was just to create a really creative home. Their dad and I separated, and the reason for that was when their father at 40 was diagnosed with mental illness, and he was bipolar, borderline personality disorder for a lot of traumatic events that occurred in his life, sexual abuse, and it was one of these things when we got separated, he was having affairs, and I realized that my children, I didn't want them to be involved and see that life. And I was very fortunate not to have alcohol in my life, even though my dad was more of a drinker. I just made a promise that I was going to be there for my children. And it was one thing too, when my mother was when left my father, she started to go in the party scene. She started to do things. And I eventually said to her, Mom, you got to stop. And she did. But she wasn't at home all the time. But it was one of these things as life has trickled down. Go to the next slide real quick. And how I parented. Go ahead, next slide. So as I look through my history, and I know I shared this last time, my great-great-grandmother went through the long walk, separation, abandonment of family, becoming an adult at an early age, loss of culture, spiritual death. Go back up really quick. And so these are the particular traumas that have been passed on. And this is where, when I began to look at this, especially with the abandonment issue and the parent and child relationship, I just told myself I was going to be there for my children. And when their father left, it was one of these things of being a single mother and always having to be at home, but also to have my children realize that I was always going to be there. They could call me, they could talk to me. I live here in Albuquerque with all three of them around. I don't have grandchildren. My kids are now 30, 26, and my daughter is 29. Next slide. So I just asked my kids some comments about what they thought of my parenting as they were growing up. So they said Mom was a good communicator. She never gave up. She's a go-getter. She's a good cook. Always there when we needed her, determined, taught us empathy, made great birthday cakes, helped us when we were stressed. I remember when my kids were in high school, their friends would always come to the house. My door was always open to them, whether they came back from their dance at 1, 2, they would come and they would be so excited about what was going on at school, how the dance went. I knew all their friends. I was a cross-country mom. I was a swimming mom. Music mom. I did everything I could. The other thing I had was jobs that correlated with them. I was a before and after school parent when we lived in Denver. So I would pick up the kids and take them to a program with me. They would stay there. I was always, working for the Bureau of Jeffco schools in Denver under Indian Ed, and then eventually coming to Albuquerque, where I was very fortunate to have a boss who would let me leave anytime I needed to. And I'll go more into it next week about some of how I have learned from my children and what I have learned in order to be who I am now. But I can tell you that the spiritual significance in my life has made me who I am today and has really made me the parent I needed to be for my kids. But I've also had to learn boundaries, and I'll go into that a little more next week. But my children are my healing. They are my connection to the world. They are, and the one thing I've always believed in is that my children will do better than me. As long as I lay the groundwork and I do what is needed to heal, I will create another generation coming forward that will be healed. So I want everybody to remember your work and what you do for your kids. And if you choose to heal, you will break generations beyond. If you decide that I do not want to live this way, because there is a better way, but I also know your children are watching and they learn from you. So I just committed to myself. My kids, my boys really took a commitment as they realized their father and family were alcoholics, that my boys decided since they were 15, they were never going to drink, they were never going to do drugs, and they were not going to have sex until they had appropriate relationships. And I can tell you, my son is 30, my youngest son is 26. They have not, they've kept their commitments and they've done what's needed. Because they did that, I decided no alcohol in the house unless I'm cooking with it and doing things to where I'm committed to them. My kids went vegan for a while. I became vegan. As swim team, I had to become active. So there were a lot of things when they committed, I had to commit. And so we would all do it as a family together. So do what you need to, but also have these good conversations. I always talk to my children. When we would sit and watch movies, TV, listen to music, do any of that, I would sit there. What do you think they're saying? What's going on in the world? In the summer times, we had these watermelon clubs where the kids in the neighborhood would bring their chairs. I would slice the watermelon and we just all would talk about what was going on. I always made sure to talk with my children. And that was key. And one of the good things they say about me is mom's always talking to us. When they have a problem, they come to mom, they text her, they're here. And I'm very grateful to have that connection and that relationship with my children. And I know they will do the same when they have kids. So thank you, everybody. And I hope that my story in a way will just intrigue you to do and be a better parent. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Those were some very beautiful stories, very inspiring stories. I do want to ask the audience if there's anybody that wants to ask any questions. I know we're almost out of time, but if anybody would like to ask any of the panelists questions about anything that they said today, please feel free to do so. And you could just speak up or raise your hand whenever you'd like to do. And as you're thinking, I do have a few questions I wanted to ask. I'm seeing so many times where our parents and younger generation are going through these things, yet they're doing them time and time and time and time again. And I'm trying to understand why that is, how they're getting to the lowest of the lowest. They're losing their children. They're going to jail. They're going to prison. They've lost everything. And then they come out, even after treatment, and they started over. Do you guys have any advice or any explanation as to why this would be happening? And I'm going through this myself with a family member right now, who has been in and out of treatment, but also has mental health as well. And we've done all we can as family to help her. And she's 21 and she's already has a rap sheet, a very long rap sheet. She's been in treatment facilities 4 times already. She's completed 2. And their next step is going to be prison. I know that. She is locked up right now as we speak. And I'm just at wits as to how we can help her. I know we cannot change her. She's the only one that can make that decision for herself. But I'm just curious if you guys understand what it is that makes people go through this, and even after they've hit rock bottom, will come out and do it again.
Yeah. So I think, that people change when they're ready to change, or, when they've had enough, because sometimes we think, oh, so-and-so is facing 40 years in prison and they're still out there running around. But sometimes, it takes a loving family member or like a skilled counselor or therapist to ask. I feel like for me to ask like the right questions that trigger thoughts or healing within. But I also feel like you shouldn't give up on them, because they're eventually going to get ready, and you're planting seeds when you do talk to them. And sometimes it takes people more consequences to get clean and sober and to get on the right path.
Thank you, Lucina. Does anybody else want to answer that question?
I think for us, we forget that what help looks like, right? I feel like just speaking with them, maybe when they're in an emotional state that
that is helping. Being there for them and supporting them, that is helping. And like you said, we might not be able to change them because they have to be ready to do that work. But just being there and loving on them, I feel like is helping them. I think we take that lightly, saying I love you and being there for somebody, but you really are helping them by showing them love and to giving them that unconditional love.
Thank you, Cynthia.
I have a brother, my brother that I've showed in the pictures. He's really suffering with alcoholism. He's 43, had a young, his son is now 6 with the mother, but he doesn't really have a part in that child's life. My mom at one time almost had custody when both of the parents ended up using, and then the child welfare stepped in. And so what I've learned with my brother, and I've created my boundaries so he knows he can't come to the house because my kids and his drinking, because they've never really seen their uncle drunk. And then one day they did, and they were surprised. And it's one of these things, not of only creating the boundaries, but I know with my brother, when he really wants to talk, he'll get hold of me. And he'll know I'll call him back. If he needs a ride somewhere and he's staying here, and I'll pick him up, take him to dinner for whatever time. I just know that he's at this place now where he's beginning almost stage 4 of alcoholism. He's very skinny and he drinks and leaves and runs, and he always goes home though when he gets sober. But my mom has to deal with a lot of the other pressures of him staying at her house, not cleaning, doing all of these things. But she firmly feels that one day he'll change. But I often tell my mom, he's got to decide. And that's one thing that happens. At least we still have that power. But I know when I do see him, it is just spend a little time of talking and taking him to a movie, or just knowing that I still feel he's my brother, and not to try and critique him or get mad at him, because he already knows it. By the time he comes into your door, he's already full with shame and guilt. But when the kids see him, they're always, "Hi, Uncle, how's it going?" They just listen to him. They listen to him when he speaks and talks, tells them of their adventures or his adventures. But they don't know his life and that way of life, but they listen to him. So I think just that, enjoying whatever time you can have, and having the pictures to show that, whether, it's just, sometimes we get enthralled in it, and the energy from all of it can really weigh you down. So you have to sort of try and choose, how do I go a different path despite what my parents have done and how they did it? I don't know if that's helpful.
And Ronnie, I have a question for you. I think I heard you say that you have sons that still do not speak with you. Is that correct?
Yes. My youngest, I've seen him. He was 18 months old when his mother and I separated and finally divorced. I didn't see him till approximately 6 years ago, when my oldest was married, and it was a shock to see him for the first time. And I introduced myself to him, and he and his older brother, they have a really good relationship, but not with me. So yeah, sure.
Can I ask you if you've attempted to heal that relationship and reach out to him at all?
Yes, I've attempted to. And my oldest, our relationship is not where it was when we were together when he was younger, before I got incarcerated, but it's really strong now. And I've mentioned to him through, if your younger brother would ever like to get together, let me know and I'll be there. So I've left that lines of communication open, and I'm not giving up any kind of, never give up hope. And that's what I would say to you, is never give up hope. For me, I know incarceration was necessary. Prison is not. It wasn't that bad, but it's what I needed for the catalyst for change, because I wasn't going to change any other way. And everybody told me the same thing. You're going to get locked up. You're going to do it. And I know. But for me, it was a necessary step in my recovery and my life story. So,
Ronnie, did you really know though? Or were you just like living this fairy tell that you would never get caught and go to prison? Did you really know you were going to
Yeah,
go to prison?
yeah. A little bit of self-disclosure. Raquel and I, we were the dynamic duo a long time ago, and we ran Southwest Oklahoma. We were pretty brazen, and we were, you're not going to catch us. We're slick. And then that just made us even more. The bravado was there, and it was just a delusion. And the house of cards came crashing.
So the
down.
truth is, you didn't really believe that you were
No.
going to actually get caught.
No,
Okay.
I didn't think so. I thought I would always get away with it. So.
Does anybody else have any questions? Ronnie, I want to say to you, don't give up. He'll come around. I could see your spirit and I feel your spirit. Our past is our past, and leave it in our past.
Thank you.
I right now don't have a relationship with my father, and he's 88. And I'm gonna be 60, and he, because of my stepmother and her treatment of us and trying to keep him away, and my dad in his old age becoming very greedy and not wanting to do, he didn't change his patterns, they just grew more. I just decided, okay, Dad, I'm not going to be in your life for a while. I've been very upfront with him and everything, and what I've been through and how I was raised and his violence. But he chooses not to remember or not to go there. So I said, okay, Dad, but I'm just going to let you know, this is where I sit right now.
So let me ask you, are you waiting for him to apologize?
No. I know I could just head over there and talk to him. I know that I've just come to a place where I always loved my dad, but then I've also realized this is who he truly is now. And this is the man that he is. And I was living the dream of wanting that good father to always come in the door and hoping he was gonna be the dad. And he hasn't, but I'm okay with where he is. Yeah. And if he does die, it's, when his mother died about 6 years ago, he also wasn't at her funeral. And everybody, he was supposed to do the eulogy, all of this. And then I had to step up and do the eulogy. I had to speak for the family and do all of these things. And I was like, where is my father? And then my sisters would rely on me to do all of this work that my father. So now he has all this land that I tried to come in and take care of, but he is thinking I'm going to take his land and that I'm going to use it and spend it, get money for it. Yeah. And I'm like, Dad, I'm just trying to help you. Yeah. But so then when I was trying to do that, I just decided, because his wife was being very mean and started to tell him all of these stories that I was coming in and was going to do something bad. So I said, Dad, as long as you're married to her and she's your wife, I can't change who she is, but I also know she doesn't like me. And I know that that's night and day between us. So my thing is, I don't know if his mother lived till 103. I don't know if my father will, but I do know when he's ill or sick, I'll drive over there and visit, but then I'll just say hello and bye, but I'm not gonna cater to him in any way. But I've forgiven him because I realize he is the man he is. And
I think that's the key, is to forgive, and we can still love. But I do hope and pray that for those that have done what Ronnie has done and shown that he has healed, and he is a different man today than he was yesterday, that he gets what he deserves. Everybody that I know, every one of my family members, if they admit it to themselves, every native I know, we relate to your stories. I absolutely appreciate you guys coming on and being vulnerable and being so personable. They were beautiful. Our purpose is to just help our Native people heal in a good way. No matter where you are in life, we just want to break the generational cycles for our children. We have to, and we have to do it for ourselves. I just took a note of several things that I heard today, and I want to just say this really quick, and then we can leave. I just want everybody here to know that if you have children, no matter where you are in life, you are still loved. I know that for a fact. I'm raising a granddaughter that still loves her mother dearly. Every time she comes and visits her, she loves her with all her heart. In order to show love in a positive way, we must first learn to love ourselves wholeheartedly. And I think that's where the process begins. I think that's where the turn is that you've got to let go of your past. You've got to let go of this shame and this guilt that we have and love yourself. When you don't love yourself, you can't give love to a child, a man, or anything. Your life will be full of trauma and drama. I also wanted to say, you know, and I'm going to get emotional because I relate so much to your story, so I apologize. Just always know, no matter where you are in life, even if you're living on the streets or you're in prison or jail and you're at your lowest, there are always going to be people that are out there that love you, especially your children and your family members. No matter what you've done to them, whether you've stolen from them, whether you've lied to them, it doesn't matter. They may not like your behavior, but they love you. I also wanted to say, even if you have children and you don't see them or they don't want a relationship with you, they still love you, and love can heal all wounds. It's never too late to start your own healing journey. It's okay to make more mistakes as you're on your road to healing. As long as you're alive, as long as your children are alive, it's never too late to start a better life, to renew yourself, to get better, to walk the road to recovery, to better things, to reconcile from the past so that you can have a better future. Your children will be waiting. Just don't make them wait too long. They need you. Your family needs you, and we need you. Finally, your past does not define you. Your present and your future is all that matters. It's the only thing that is important, as what Gina was saying earlier. I'm touched by your stories. Thank you so much for this. I hope that I see you guys here next week. I hope that you pass the word to this. I think this is important work that we are doing. Next week, it's going to be talking more about our journeys to healing. I just thank you guys for opening up your hearts and being vulnerable today. You've definitely touched me. You're not alone. We've all been through this, and we're going to get through this together. Does anybody have any questions before we leave today?
I don't have any questions. I just got a lot I can relate to as well to all of your stories. Raquel, like whenever you showed that your pictures, I got sick to my stomach because I do still have a lot of flashbacks from being over there 80 Warriors and wearing those grays. But when I saw that picture, I got sick to my stomach and I was like, oh, wow. I was like, that looks familiar. And then you said you were from Lawton, Muskogee. And I was like, oh, okay, because I'm here in Oklahoma. But I was addicted, you know, I was alcoholic, meth addict as well. And I had so many car wrecks, so many DUIs where I was getting slaps on the wrist overnight, you know, overnight stays in jail. Finally, I went to Okmulgee County and messed around and got into an accident, DUI over there, and had my child in the car with me in that accident. And I hurt my child in that accident. So I went to prison for that. I have I lost my kiddos too. I lost my kiddos. I lost my car, my education. You know, I was going to school, lost my job, apartment, lost everything, you know. But I'm trying not to cry. But I went to prison. In there, that's where I learned to love myself. You know, prison was the best thing for me. I didn't think so at the time, but prison was the best thing for me, and it saved my life. I feel not only did it save my life, it also saved my husband because he was an alcoholic too. And it also saved my children, you know, because they could have been doing the same thing. They could be going down the same road that I was going down. But I got out, you know, I got my kiddos back. I now have a home. I got my BSW I got a bachelor in social work and a bachelor in criminal justice. I am working on my master's in social work at the University of Oklahoma right now. I've gotten a lot of scholarships over time. I also have a grandchild. I have a grandson. He's 3 months old. And Lestina, like how you were saying, you know, you spend all this, all of you, you know, you spend time with your grandkids. He's never seen me. He's only 3 months old, but he will never see me drunk or high. You know, I'm just so grateful. And my daughters, you know, I have a 21-year-old and the 15-year-old. She's the one that was in the car with me. But my oldest daughter, which she was 11 at the time, and my oldest daughter, Mia, was 11, and then Mia was 5 at the time. But Angel was left at the school. You know, the cops had to pick her up at the school, and she's worried, wondering, where's my mom at? I didn't get to go to the hospital with my youngest daughter. I had to go to jail. She had to ride in the ambulance, you know, with my aunt there, and I was on my way to jail, and it hurt so bad. And just what I did to my mother, you know, just the look on her face of everything that I had done to her, everything keeps me sober. And I don't understand either why people go back to prison, because it is not something that I would ever want to experience again in my life. You know, just y'all know, you know, it's not something I ever want to experience again in my life. But my grandson, you know, I just love him very much. And I'm just glad that my daughters can call me. My oldest daughter, she stays up all hours of the night, and she'll call me at 12, 1 o'clock at night. I'll still answer that phone for her. You know, my youngest daughter, she is so smart. I did ask her, you know, can I have your permission to tell what, you know, your part in my story, you know? And she tells me, yes, Mom, you can tell it, you know. But all of your stories are great. I was crying. I was crying through all of them. I was like, oh, I was there, you know, I can relate. But thank y'all so much. And hearing your stories also gives me hope, because I work at the Muskogee Nation, you know, the Family Violence Prevention Program. So I work with a lot of people, but I want to be able to tell my story and do things like you all are doing one of these days. You know, I don't have time right now with going to school and trying to balance work and all that, trying to volunteer where I can. But I really appreciate it. I'm glad I stumbled upon, you know, these webinars, and I appreciate it. And I just thank y'all. Y'all all are just beautiful, you know. But I thank you for giving me this time. And I can tell I'm healing, you know, because I'm not bawling like I almost did, but I didn't. So, but thank you all for giving me this time to talk. I appreciate
Thank you, Gina. You could have been on this panel today.
Next time, if you need me.
Yeah, but the truth of it is we all have our past, and we need to let go and forgive ourselves. And that is the point. You know, let's focus on the future. Does anybody else have any words of wisdom, anything they want to end us with, any questions? Also, if you want to stay behind for a few minutes, we want to make sure that just like with Gina, that everybody leaves today in a good way. We don't want anybody leaving being upset or any types of bad feelings. So if you want to stay on longer to be with us, we will be here. So I just